Welcome to Backyard Forestry for March 2026. The Stockton University Maple Project is our subject tonight, featuring Dr. Judith Vogel, professor and director of the Maple Project at Stockton University. Just a note about our annual meeting, which is coming up on March 21st, Saturday. It is sold out. Sorry for anybody who missed the chance to register. We did have a long wait list, but we had to cut the line at a certain point due to venue restrictions. So hopefully you can get there next year. We are videoing the event and we do plan to air segments of it. Would appreciate if you would support the NJFA by becoming a member for 2026. You can do that at our website, njforestry.org. We are a 501c3 organization. We advocate for all forests in New Jersey. We advocate sustainable use and science-based forest management and are the voice of woodland owners in New Jersey, both public and private. As a note, this presentation is for general informational purposes only and is not intended to constitute specific legal, tax, or other advice. No claims, promises, or guarantees are made about its accuracy, completeness, adequacy, or suitability. We encourage landowners to consult with their own attorneys, accountants, and foresters for professional advice concerning their woodlands and otherwise. Our guest tonight is Dr. Judith Vogel. She's a professor of mathematics at Stockton University, and she is a director of the USDA grant-funded Stockton Maple Project. She's a mathematician by training, but she supports interdisciplinary research that connects academic inquiry with community engagement. Her work explores the potential for maple sugaring and other forest-based products within the New Jersey pinelands using the Stockton campus, which is approximately 1,600 acres, as a living laboratory for place-based agroforestry research. Through partnerships with local landowners, businesses, and schools, the Stockton Maple Project investigates how underutilized forest resources can support education, sustainability, and small-scale economic development in the region. Just a little bit of a thumbnail on the Maple Project. As we noted, it's with the support of a USDA grant. Stockton is drawing maple syrup from red maples using technology to compensate for the lower sugar levels and shorter productivity periods, as well as exploring agroforestry opportunities in New Jersey forests. Tonight, we will learn how research, community partnerships, and small-scale experimentation can expand the ecological and economic potential of New Jersey's public and private wooded lands. And there you see the actual syrup on the screen. And now, without further ado, we are pleased to present the Stockton Maple Project with Dr. Judith A. Vogel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. If at any point you can't hear me, if something goes wrong on my end, please let me know through the chat and we can get back on track. Thank you so much, Richard, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so happy to be here with you tonight. And I have to say, the mission of your organization and of this webinar series in particular really does directly align with the goals of my project. And I think it is a wonderful fit for the backyard forester to be talking about maple sugaring in the Garden State. And so here we are redefining what we mean by the Garden State with New Jersey and this novel product, at least where I'm located, down here in South Jersey. Now, I could see from the chat, many of you are coming from across the state and maybe even a few of you outside of the state. And so if you're located in the northern region of New Jersey, you may be very well familiar. I saw one name that I recognize very well for her help in getting us started in our project. So thank you for being here, Charlize, and supporting me as I talk tonight. She is, in fact, the expert beyond me. So I appreciate you being here. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit about why this is such a great topic for the backyard forester. And to reintroduce myself just a little bit, I'm Judith Vogel. I'm a professor at Stockton University. And as you saw in my bio, I'm a mathematician by training. So that's strange. That's a little bit unusual. That here I am, the director of the Stockton Maple Project, which you would maybe associate with somebody environmental studies, sustainability, certainly in something more of the earth sciences. Um, so I do consider myself a scientist as a mathematician, but I'm much more likely to be in front of a blackboard teaching calculus than I would be talking about maple trees. So that's the first thing that's a little unusual. The other unusual thing about any project related to maple syrup is that we're in New Jersey. And more specifically, sorry about that, guys. We're in South Jersey. I know New Jerseyans still think of us as two separate states. And yeah, it actually makes a very big difference that it's an unusual or novel region for maple syrup production being in the southern region of New Jersey. And in general, we don't really think of New Jersey as like the hub of maple production, right? And yet we do have historical ties to maple sugaring. In fact, our state is the ancestral lands of the Lenape tribe, and we have historical evidence that this indigenous people did produce maple syrup. And so, as we are talking about maple syrup and the unusual or oddness of it taking place here in South Jersey, we need to remember that this is not new, that this was something that was done historically by the indigenous North American tribes. And in that regard, also the tribes that existed here in New Jersey. Okay, so what do we think of when we think of maple syrup, at least in the United States? Probably Vermont comes to mind, and it should, because Vermont is the biggest maple syrup producer in the United States, throughout the states of the United States of America. Vermont, though, is a small producer in comparison to the biggest producer of maple syrup, and that's Canada, generally, and Quebec specifically. And Quebec, Canada maple syrup outproduces the United States by far. They are the biggest exporters of maple syrup, and more Canadian maple syrup is sold in the United States than United States maple syrup is sold in the United States. However, Vermont is the one we think of when we think of the states in our union. And yes, in the United States, Vermont is the biggest producer. So I have a funny little anecdote about myself and Vermont. I was actually made in Vermont. Funny little family story. I say I was born and bred in New Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl through and through, but I was made in Vermont because my parents went away for a weekend trip and came home with me. And so the story in our family has always been that I had maple syrup in my veins from the time I was a little girl. I loved maple syrup. I grew up in a poor family, pretty financially hardship. And yet we always had pure maple syrup. We usually had the lesser quality, but it was important to my parents for some reason that we had pure maple syrup. And so if you can imagine, my parents now think it's pretty hysterical that I'm the one heading up the Stockton Maple Project. And it's become a little bit of a joke in our family. Um, but we're not in Vermont. We're not even in New England, which, if you think about it in a more broadly based way, we think of New England as the target for maple syrup production. We're in New Jersey. And so, what's wrong with New Jersey? Maybe you have a list in your back pocket of things that are wrong with New Jersey, but we'll just focus on what's wrong with New Jersey when it comes to maple syrup production. I mean, certainly big hair. I had it in the day, no longer. Um, but maple syrup production in New Jersey is a little bit of a tricky business. And there's two reasons why. At least in South Jersey, one of the reasons is primary, and that is that we don't have indigenous sugar maples in South Jersey, right? We're down here in the middle of the Pine Barrens, and our predominant maple tree is a red maple. It's commonly called a swamp maple by old timers out in the woods. right? So we have red maples that grow in abundance and in fact outperform any other tree. And so when land is cleared, if not carefully managed, the red maple will overtake. Um, but what is the best maple tree for syrup production is the sugar maple. And the reason for that is because of the sugar content. And we'll talk about this a little bit, but we're going to be focusing primarily on these two types of maple trees in our talk today. The sugar maple, which is the ideal tree to be getting our sap and hence syrup from, which has roughly about 4% sugar, can have more. There are certain varieties that are being bred for more sugar content than even a typical sugar maple. Our red maple trees here in South Jersey, if you have 2% sugar in your sap, that's thought of as pretty good yield. Here at Stockton's Grove, we sometimes only have 1.2%, 1.4% sugar. And that small difference in percentage makes a big difference in work, what we have to do to turn that sap into syrup. And so one of the issues with New Jersey is that we don't have, at least here in South Jersey, the right sort of tree or what is ideal for tapping. The other component is that we don't have the most ideal weather. And this again is a little different between North and South Jersey, although all of New Jersey has more challenging weather, climate and weather than the New England states for maple production. And so, I mean, all of you New Jerseyans know if you just, take a step to the left or right, your weather might change here in New Jersey. And it turns out that that's frustrating as a maple producer, not being able to sort of count on weather patterns that you might be able to in other regions producing maple syrup. And then, of course, another issue here in New Jersey is that we are a highly populated, densely populated state, right? About 1,200 people per square mile. And so what that means is that we have, in some comparative sense, less forest available to us in which we can, especially privately owned, in which we can actually produce maple syrup. Now, one of the wonderful things about where I'm located is that I have a forest, call it my forest, but it is the New Jersey, we call it the Pine Barrens, but more and more, obviously, I think you know from the literature, we're referring to it as the New Jersey Pinelands, right? The Pineland Reserve. But still, here among locals, Pine Barrens, that word still creeps in. And one of the things I keep it on this slide because one of the things important about our work and our research and our outreach is that we want to redefine the what this land means to the people who live in it and around it, and to replace this sort of negative orientation of being a barren forest, and to bring value to this resource that we have it so plentifully here in South Jersey. Plentiful in terms of forests, but not plentiful in terms of sugar maples. However, we do, as I said, have lots and lots of red maples here. So we are Stockton is a university in the middle of this natural reserve, 1.1 million acres of forest, and we sit inside. And as Richard said, we have about 1,600 acres of our own forest. And I say ours, but we're a public institution, so it belongs to everyone. And from across the state, you are always welcome in our forest to come and enjoy it. You'll have my contact information at the end of the talk. If you are coming down, let me know and I'll meet you out in the grove and give you a tour. But some of the things that are unique to where we're located is that we have very sandy, acidic soil, and that impacts our production and our flavor profile of maple syrup. And we have a forest that's full of scrub pines, bull pines, as you know, white cedar, and red maple. And of course, our own monster, which is wonderful. So Stockton sits in the middle of this. And what we've done with the land that we have, this 1,600 acres, is we have created what now is a $1.7 million grant initiative with the USDA. It started small. It did not start with 1.7 million. It actually started in my backyard. And so how does a mathematician become the director of the Maple Project? It happens out of just a zest for lifelong learning, just curiosity. We have, Charlize will remember three little girls, but they're not so little anymore. I keep saying we have three little girls, but they're now 22 and 19 and 15. But the very, very first time we ever tapped our trees on our little hobby farm, they were itty bitty. Um, and we lived a life of just curiosity. We lived on a little hobby farm, about 10 acres. And one year I turned to my husband and I said, because I'm the maple syrup queen, I love it. I said, we have maple trees. Could we make maple syrup? And within 2 days, he had delivered some supplies, some taps and tubings, and we tried it. That was all it was. We just tried it. And we stumbled across the perfect season for maple syrup production in New Jersey. If we had tried it a year earlier or a year later, we would have been convinced that you couldn't do it. But we happened to have a hard freeze. I mean, weeks and weeks of freezing temperatures that then turned into a long spring. And I'll talk in a couple of slides of what that means for maple syruping. But basically, it means a very long freeze thaw, cold, cold nights below freezing, and warm days. And we just happened by magic, and there is a little magic in maple syrup production, I have to admit. By magic, we stumbled across a season where we got just enough syrup for a couple of pancake breakfasts, and we got the bug. We got curious. We started learning more. We started researching. Again, just as my family, we borrowed neighbor's tree who happened to have sugar maples. We did not. So if in South Jersey, if there's a sugar maple on your property, it's because somebody planted it. They thought it was pretty. We did not have any, but we borrowed them from neighbors. And the next year we were making more syrup. And that's when I started thinking about the education component. I wrote a very small grant that was internal to Stockton. So Stockton actually paid for the very first experiment with this after my family did this little pilot. And we learned about technologies that could actually produce more syrup in this strange, more novel environment. We started looking at pumps, and again, I'll talk about this more in the production. And we started looking at RO systems. And Stockton funded a very small grant to get some of this technology, and it worked. And once I had this proof of concept, me and several other faculty members wrote a USDA grant. And the first grant we received was for just under $500,000. It was for a proof of concept. How big could we make this? And at this point, could we do it at Stockton? So up until then, everything we were doing was in my backyard. It was in my hobby farm. So all of you here who are part of this backyard forestry webinar, that's where this started. It started with just taps and tubings. It then turned into a very small tubing system with a pump. And the next step was $500,000. We've now been funded 3 times. Each one was just under $500,000 funding. And our work was so impressive, I like to say, that the USDA more recently provided us with an additional supplemental funding of just under $300,000 to continue the work we were doing without a new grant being written. So we're really proud of what we're doing here. It's something that is making a difference here at Stockton in our community, and it started in a backyard forest. And so I really love how this talk relates to your broader organization of the New Jersey Forest Association, but also this niche that you have right here in this webinar of working with the backyard forester. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a tour of our grove. This is a picture close up of our grove at Stockton. And we now have a professional tubing system that began with one of the members who was on the call right now, helping us set up this remarkable system that we have in place that runs tubings to now about 600 trees. And when I say that, it sounds big to me because I started with 4 trees in my backyard, um, but it's a really small operation. We produce about 70 gallons of maple syrup every year. But you need to understand that that's coming from, we work on about a 70 to 1 or an 80 to 1 ratio of sap to syrup. So for every 80 gallons of sap we collect, we get only 1 gallon of syrup. And that's because our sugar content is so very low. But this tubing system is part of what was our proof of concept. Could we create a production site that could act like an industry size tubing system? So we are nowhere close to even the smallest family farm in Vermont. We work right now with a Vermont family farm, and they have about 20,000 taps. We still have 600. In fact, the 600 was an expansion based on help that they had given us. But it's more than just production that we are interested in. Absolutely, we want to make maple syrup. Everyone on my team is interested in getting maple syrup on their pancakes. That is priority one. But at Stockton, being an educative site, we are also very much concerned with research and outreach. And all three of these, production, research, outreach, is all centered on education. So everything we do, even the production, is about education. It's about looking at from every field, looking at from the history, from the culture, from the sustainability, from the environmental studies, from the mathematics, from the chemistry of it, to all aspects that the sustainable forest agricultural component that it provides. And so being at Stockton, it's a really remarkable place. I think every institution of higher learning has this focus on education. But what makes Stockton unique is that we embrace from the very beginning. Our college was founded in 1969, and it was founded on interdisciplinary lifelong learning. And if you look at any college's mission now, they use that term. They use interdisciplinary learning. They use lifelong learning. And they're the new buzzwords in education. But Stockton was founded on it in 1969 before these were popular things to say to impress future students. This was what we believed. It's why I came to Stockton. It's why I was a student at Stockton. And it's why I came back to work as a professor at Stockton. Because we're not only just supported and allowed to teach and work outside our discipline, we're actually actively encouraged. And so it's a great place to be in which we can kind of tackle this project from a variety of academic pursuits. So there's a new component of our research and our outreach, and that is partnerships. So the third grant that we wrote is all about building partnerships. And I want to say here towards the beginning of my talk and revisit it at the end, because I want you as an organization or as individuals to recognize that we value being out there in the community, connecting with people of like mind, whether you're a small farm or a small business owner, or the broader organization that you all belong to right now. If you have an interest in participating in what we're doing, please reach out to me. This is it has been a focus from the beginning, but it is now a funded focus of our project. Okay, so what are we doing? We are really educating an underinformed community. And what I mean by that, underinformed, not uneducated, not lacking in intelligence or but not truly understanding what maple syrup is, where it comes from, how you make it. These are things that our community down here in South Jersey does not know. There is not an event that goes by that somebody isn't surprised by the process of making maple syrup to the point where they think flavor is added to it. They are not even sure that it comes from a tree. We are working with sort of the bare bones of an underinformed community. And that's our primary focus is saying where it comes from, how we produce it, and then from there, teaching it as a sustainable land use. So, one of the things that is so important to me is to bring value to our forests. There are so many ways that our forests have value for us as human beings. Certainly, environmentally, the forests and their aid in keeping, the air clean, and we all know the importance of having trees in our lands, and their uses for timber. This is an important use of our forests, and it needs to be managed well, but it needs to be recognized that timber is an important land use of our forests. What I'm talking about here with this project is an underdeveloped resource, maple syrup production, right? This is something that we don't think of because it's not a year-round process. And so we often don't identify it as a sustainable practice that can, in fact, bring value to our land, and both as a personal use, but also economically. Much of what we do with maple production takes place off season for farmers. And so if a farm has some wooded lands, it's an amazing way to use that land off season and to aid in their economic development. So that's what we're doing. But it really comes down to this. We're teaching the basics. So when I talked about my daughter's ages, this little girl here, who's about, I don't know, 6 at this point, is now 15. And this was our second year tapping in our home, our backyard. This is a borrowed tree, because it's either a sugar or a silver. I'd have to look more closely. But we started this way, the basics. You put a tap in the tree at the right time of year, and you put a drop line or a drip line into a bucket and you collect the sap. And that's it. We often say the tree makes the syrup. Well, it makes the sap, and we're the conduit. We do the work to turn the sap into syrup. But very basic startup, all you need is a tap and a tube and a food grade bucket. You can reuse a milk carton, and it's as simple and as cheap as that. I'm not going to actually go into, excuse me here, sorry, the specifics of the size of the tap and the mechanism for doing it, but it's really just a matter of drilling a hole in the tree. Now there's some things that you want to do to make sure you're doing this nice and cleanly, and you know very simply, when I drill my hole, we want to tap, we want a drill with a very low friction, so they actually have engineered drill bits specifically for this. But when we started, we didn't know this. And we used a Home Depot drill. And you know what? We got sap. We didn't know that you were supposed to drill in just in one smooth motion in and one smooth motion out so you don't burn the wood. And yet we got sap. So there's a lot that you can do even a little bit wrong, and still the tree will produce some sap for you, and create your syrup. So you can get into the weeds with this and really know all of the particulars. I'll go as so far as to say the hammer this little girl is using is just a hammer from my husband's barn, and you can get a maple syrup hammer to hammer in those taps just right. So that's where we started with this, really teaching the basics. And when I say basics, I mean we had people who could not identify a maple leaf. And so we started at events putting out these little charts and having kids come to us with leaves. And if they got a red maple, if they found a maple, a red, a silver, a sugar, we would put it on the board and they could be so proud of their leaf. And we learned very quickly that we also needed a board for not a maple because of how many leaves that would be handed to us that were not. And so this, working with the young kids, working with the community to really identify things like this. I grew up with a maple tree in my front yard. I thought everybody could pick out a maple leaf without any thought. And yet this was something that we needed to teach. Um, so it turns out there's lots of trees you can tap, and I have a whole bunch here. The maples are up at the top. They're the best producers, and of course, that's where you're going to get the maple syrup. But you can tap sycamores if you have them in your backyard forest. Black walnut. I will say, if you tap a black walnut and you boil it down, just be careful because it will pop. The oils in it, something happens at the very end. I learned it a scary way. And I never ever mention black walnut without mentioning that the sugars can pop as you boil it at the end. But you can see here some sap to syrup ratios. A sugar maple has a 40-to-1 ratio. You need 40 gallons. So think about like a 50 gallon drum. That's how much sap you need to make 1 gallon of syrup. I have up here 50-to-1 for red maple. That is like in an ideal situation. We do not find this at our red maples. Our red maples do not produce at this amount. Walnut is not as much sugar. We have like 67-to-1. Birch, 80-to-1. I have had birch syrup we produced from like a swamp birch. And its grade was probably more of a cooking grade. So I just want to kind of look at the two prominent maples for making maple syrup in our experience. So the sugar maples, any of you guys up in North Jersey, you're going to find sugar maples in abundance, and they have these sort of smooth dorsal-like components of their leaves. So almost like a shark dorsal fin, nice and smooth. A red maple will have the same shape, but it'll be jagged. So we have this as a nice kind of illustration of I was going to see if you guys could guess first, but maybe you did. So here we have a red maple and a sugar maple. And so at Stockton, we are exclusively tapping red maple. And it does have a different flavor profile, more robust than the sugar maple. People compare it or describe it as not as sweet. It has exactly the same sugar content, but because it's more robust, it hits your tongue a little bit differently. The sugar maple syrup doesn't have quite as robust a flavor, and so the sugar hits your tongue more. There's other things that impact sugar, though, besides species of tree, although that's the one that is the most prominent. Also, tree to tree. If it's in a different part of the stand, if it's exposed to more sunlight, it can change the sugar in that tree. The diameter of the tree, how dense the foliage is, how the growth rate of the tree. There's a research that says the wider growth the rings of the tree are, the sweeter, and also the soil. And we know down here in the pinelands that we have that, as I was saying, that sandy, more acidic soil. All right, so what do you have to do? All you have to do to collect sap, put a tap in a tree and the tree gives you sap. We collect it with the tube, but there are things that you have to be aware of. And part of that is the timing. So in order to collect sap, it has to be during the freeze thaw. So this is freezing nights and warm days. And this is when the sap is going to flow. The sap flows from the base of the tree, the roots up into the crown, and we intercept it. And it's during that time, there is a part of the fall where it can also run, but typical time for tapping a tree is in the spring. And this occurs during this time where we have freezing cold nights. So you get this positive and then negative pressure. So freezing cold nights, the tree pulls in, freezes that sap, and then expands during the warm days. And that positive negative pressure is what allows the sap to flow. We intercept it on its root from the roots to the foliage. They're not popped yet, but to the crown of the tree. And we collect the sap. And modern technology can help, and we will mention that in a minute. So it's during this freeze thaw in late winter and early spring that we collect our sap. And we have to stop when the buds break. First of all, the tree needs the sap during this time, right? When it's starting to produce the leaves, the tree needs the sap. But the tree also has a really wonderful way of protecting itself, as all nature does. Um, at bud break, the syrup changes flavor. In fact, it's called buddy syrup. So if you wait too long and you're still producing sap, just as the buds break, the syrup changes. It changes in texture. It has a little bit of a stringiness to it. It changes in flavor. It's a little bitter, and it will reach a point where it's just not pleasing at all to the tongue. And it changes in process, where as you try to boil it, it bubbles up and boils over to a point where you can't keep up with the foam that it produces. So the tree has a really wonderful way of protecting what it needs when it needs it. And that's something that you have to honor because of the protective components that the tree has worked into it. So what do? We boil the sap. That's it. We add nothing to it. There's no flavor added, no additional sugar added. And in fact, the whole point is that we're trying to get the sugar content from about, in our case, less than 2% to about 66, 67% sugar. And that's what's going to make it stable. That's going to make it act like honey would, where it's not going to go bad. Um, and we do that by simply boiling off the water. So here we have, this is our evaporator. Prior to going through the evaporator or burning it off, it's basically a shallow pan. We have a warming tray up here on top of it that it creates a warmer base for the sap to be added to the evaporator. And I could talk about sort of the dynamics of how that works, but simply speaking, we just need to change the density. We need to preserve all of the minerals, the proteins that are in the sap, the sugars that are in the sap, and we need to get rid of the water. And we do that with some technology, an RO system. If any of you have well water, you might have an RO system on your house. And when you run it through an RO system, you kind of discard half the water. And in your home, what you're getting rid of is all the impurities, and you're keeping the water. What we do is run it in reverse. We keep these impurities, which are the good stuff, what we want, and we throw out the H2O, the pure water. And so we can condense this down so that we're starting not with 2%, but with say 8%. We'll run it through several times, and we double the sugar content each time. But in the end, we do want to cook it because that's what takes those proteins and caramelizes them and creates that wonderful maple flavor. If all we did was just evaporate the water in some way, we wouldn't have that rich, deep maple flavor. And I equate it to kind of like if you're cooking a hamburger, if you eat the hamburger raw, I do it, I'm sorry, it's not going to have the same flavor profile as if you cook it. And it's going to have an even better flavor profile if you cook it over wood. And that's what we do. We cook over a wood evaporator. And so a lot of people, because we're small batch, they can taste the smoke in the maple, this sort of light smoky flavor that adds even another dimension to what we're doing, to the flavor of what we're doing. So this is it. We boil it. This is our evaporator. This is some members of our team. But there are some modern technologies that can help. I mentioned the RO for condensing before we do the cooking. But we also have a pump, and I have here just a really small homemade DIY pump that we use on our partner sites. Now, the one that we have at Stockton is more of an industry standard, but a small water pump, this one costs, I think, less than $100. You can retrofit it to create this positive negative pressure. It's not just a simple water pump that just pulls. It has to have this pull and release, but you can retrofit a simple water pump that helps encourage sap production. It doesn't work alone though. You need the tree to have that internal freeze thaw in order for this to work. But this technology can help, and that's what is making this successful in the South Jersey region. But even if you don't need it in North Jersey, it helps yield bigger harvests. And so even in a region where you can produce maple syrup without these technologies, it is very helpful now to increase your yield. So why use maple syrup? I don't know if you guys need this slide. For me, just because it tastes better. I think as a natural sugar, it's wonderful. I prefer it to honey. Don't tell my husband who works his heart out to keep the bees going on our property. But maple syrup is always my go-to. It has a lower glycemic index. And so because of that, you're less likely to have a sugar high or a sugar crash when you use maple syrup. So what are we doing with this project beyond just production? We're in schools. We have over 21 schools that we go to every year, and we talk about all sorts of things: history, economics, ecology, culinary is now a big one, cultural studies. And we are just interested in using this topic because it's so much fun and so engaging. And it usually ends with a pancake breakfast to get students interested in topics of agroforestry related to all of these, right? All of these topics. And yet the primary topic that is supporting this sort of skeleton of many, many topics in academics is agroforestry and really bringing value to the forests of New Jersey. So we do this in many ways. We have family-friendly events. One of our favorites is Adopt a Tree, where families get to come out and adopt one of the trees in our grove, and love it throughout the season, come back and visit it, give it hugs, and then they get a little bit of the syrup that their tree produced. So that's been a really positive outreach. We have story time in the forest. This is my daughter Jane when she was itty bitty. If you want the best guide for producing maple syrup in a very easy voice, I love this book, Curious George Makes Maple Syrup. It is an amazing resource, and not just for kids. It even talks about that syrup that bubbles over and how you handle it. Because the way you handle the bubbly syrup, if it's foaming too much, is to add a little bit of oil to it. And there's a part of the story where Curious George leans over when it's bubbling up, and he's so concerned about the bubbles, and the butter on his pancake slips in, and it helps with the bubbling. So it's just a funny little aside. I don't make any money off of it, but that book's only $5 on Amazon, and it's really a cute little resource. We do workshops. If you notice here, we have cookies in the shape of maple leaves. These were developed by Stockton's catering service, and they've become a great partner for us. So we do workshops, and we have a lot of partners. One of the beautiful things about maple syrup production is that you can talk about urban agroforestry. So many of our urban sites have sugar maples. Even here in South Jersey, they planted them as an urban canopy. And so these trees that line Philadelphia, or down here in our, not Atlantic City, it's a little too shore based, but we have a city nearby, Egg Harbor City, Absecon, Pleasantville. These trees have sugar maples that you can tap. So you can get into communities and talk about preserving an urban canopy with this topic. We have a beautiful partnership with Badstow Historic Village, and if you've never been there, please visit. Um, because of their historic nature and their tie to the Revolutionary War era, they have sugar groves. So maple syrup production was thought of as a possible alternative to cane sugar, which was harvested by slaves during the time of the Revolutionary War. And so Badstow's connection to that time in history means they have a very old established sugar maple grove, which is unique in South Jersey. We have some sugar maples peppered throughout, but a grove is unique. And so we have this opportunity to partner, and we do some with modern technology, and we do some with, historic tin buckets, metal taps. And so it's been a nice partnership with them. We're doing important research. We're partnered right now with a Vermont family production site, and they do research on our grove and help us expand our grove in ways in which they have decades of experience, and we have 7 years. So this has been some important research. Also, our forest is a virgin forest for this, and so we are able to get data that you can't get in New England because their forests have been tapped for hundreds of years. We also have this really unique approach to teaching this down here in the shore of New Jersey. One of our sites at Stockton, we have an Atlantic City campus, and there's no maple trees nearby. And so one of the unique approaches that we have to teaching schools in like the shore region, and so everyone in New Jersey can get to the shore in a half hour or less, is we talk about salt production. And it's the same process. You can harvest salt water, and all you have to do is boil it down to get salt. This was actually an experiment that I did with brackish water, and you could get salt from the brackish water as well. And again, it just required more boiling. And so we could talk about the different salt concentration or sugar concentration that's in the original amount, and how that then, with the density measures, would turn into salt or syrup. So this is just a unique approach that we're doing. And then it all relates back to sustainable practices here in New Jersey. So our project is out there. We've grown, we have a huge team member, we're doing tabling events, we're selling syrup, but our primary goal is the same. We're changing the culture. I'm not going to play this for the sake of time, but it's a little girl who had her very first taste of maple syrup at one of our sites, and her reaction was sort of priceless. And we're changing a culture because maple syrup, pure maple syrup, is not the culture in South Jersey. Every event I have, there is somebody, and it doesn't have to be a child, who has never tasted pure maple syrup. Oh, I just did that. That was an accident. Yay! All right. So in that, we want them to recognize the value of the syrup, but we also want them to recognize the value of the land. And so as we get more immersed in this project and it grows, it is always going back to what your mission is at your organization, and that is recognizing the value of our New Jersey forests. And I'm going to kind of just go through these last slides super quickly. Recognizing this value, you can see New Jersey isn't even on the map here. Maybe it's one of these lines, but I don't think so, right? And we really want to increase an awareness, not just of what we're doing, but also of United States made, American made maple syrup, and to reduce our dependence on Canadian maple syrup. And so one way to do that is with, I'm going to kind of go through this, the opportunity that we have here in New Jersey. Of the states that produce maple syrup at all, we are the smallest, and we have the biggest population. Vermont is one of the smallest states in population, and they make the most maple syrup. And so we are now partnering with Vermont, trying to get them connected to our consumer base so that New Jerseyans acquire a taste for Vermont-made maple syrup when we run out, because we will run out. I love this slide because a study done by a Vermont producers showed that if New Jersey were to tap their own maple trees at the same percentage that Vermont taps theirs, so if we just encourage production at the same percentage that Vermont does, and we tapped that same percentage of our maple trees, we would run out of maple syrup for our consumers with a single shot glass per year. So our consumers, if we just consumed a shot glass of syrup, we would outpace our own production. And that's just if we're really producing, and we're not. So we need to introduce our consumers to another producer source. And that is part of the mission of our project now, is connecting our consumer base to Vermont producers specifically because of this sort of uh, connection of how many consumers we have and how few they have. So it's kind of an interesting statistic that leads into the next component of what we're working on right now, which is marketing maple syrup, ours, and then trying to parlay that into a preference for American-made maple syrup. So we're interested in partners. And so, as I said at the beginning, keep us in mind if you are producing maple syrup or just want us to come visit your farm. We are in the process of making a mobile maple museum that we can bring to farm stands and sort of drum up excitement. And, we would be there to introduce your consumers to what we're doing and maybe give you an opportunity to connect with us as an educative site. I will introduce one of our satisfied customers. I don't know if you all can recognize this, but Arnold came to Stockton, and I had the privilege of handing him a bottle of our maple syrup. And I can't do the accent well, but his exact words to me were, "I will have this with drinks on the plane." And I think that was the best endorsement ever. So I'll just end by saying, this is a project that's very personal to me. This is my backyard right here with a very small evaporator. It started on my family farm. I now have a nursery of super sweets, something that Charlize introduced us to, that when I'm 120 years old will be mature enough to tap. So looking forward to that day. But I thank you for inviting me here today, and any questions you have. This is my team here at Stockton. I'm really proud to be a part of it. And I saw Matt Olson. He is here tonight with us as well, and he's in this picture. So thank you for inviting me to be here.
That was truly excellent. Thank you so much. There are a number of questions in the chat and one in the Q&A. Let's just start with the Q&A. It's an interesting question. I'm not sure if you even touched on this one. Do spotted lanternflies affect sugar production in red maples?
They have not as yet. So Matt Olson is actually on this call, and I know he can't interact. He would be the better one, he's our forester to talk about this. What we are finding is that they are attacking trees that are in our swamp. I'm forgetting the name of the tree. Matt, maybe you could put it in the chat for us. But it's a certain type of tree that they are going after, but they have been leaving our maples alone. Yeah, I'm not sure. He probably.
They're just the tree of heaven, of course, is what
Yeah,
Matt is
the
saying.
tree of heaven. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I had angel in my head and I couldn't get it out of my head, but that was the tree of heaven. Yeah. So because we have some of those trees. Oh, sorry. I think I turned this off. We have some of those trees. I'm going to stop sharing so we can do a full screen here.
Beautiful.
They have been going after those, and they have been leaving our red maples alone.
Okay. There actually a question came up. You and I had kicked around just briefly the question of farmland assessment and whether maple syrup production qualifies. And actually, someone raised the question. I'm not going to try to answer it, but they're raising the question of whether or not it should be the value of the sap at pennies or the value of the final product. And that is a big issue in farmland assessment. I don't think we should try to opine on that, but I just pointed out, and there's a lot of pressure right now on farmland assessment, and there's a movement to have more assessor training, and it is a difficult issue when you add value to a forest product.
It's
Uh,
a complex issue, and for me personally, because it is you are not adding to it. I really do see a difference that you are taking away, right? You're removing something. Um, I I personally believe it should be based on the syrup. Um, I think it
But it doesn't mean that an assessor is going to listen to you.
that is
So we
that
have
is
to be very
that
cautious about
That is
that.
Judy Vogel, just a
Yeah. Right.
smiley, Disney princess approach to this.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely you would talk to your forester and talk to the state forester who does your inspections to see what they're going to say about the production when you
Yeah,
file your application. And you may also want to talk to your local assessor to see how they treat it. Assessors vary very much town to town in how they look at properties. And so anyway,
absolutely.
this is just a word of caution that don't necessarily assume that the syrup value will be the attributed value for the assessment threshold. It's just a point.
Absolutely. But I will say one of the things that we could start doing is adding or understanding the value of the sap as well. So, again,
Mhm.
this is just me talking, not coming from anywhere, but more and more the sap's value as an independent energy drink is becoming known. Canadians, athletes are drinking it regularly. Certain sports are in particular bicycling, things that want the hydration with and sort of the proteins and minerals that it adds without the sugar, like the without the bad sugar. So I
Mhm.
think we can also
Understood.
at some point start talking about the value of the sap. All right.
Well, I think the idea is to start the conversation and to be aware of this difference in valuation and that it's not something one can make assumptions about. But that's one of the reasons you get involved with organizations that are involved in this stuff. And we then speak to legislators and tax people and try to
And
find
that's
a
true. I
solution.
think the more people who are raising the question, the more we get the conversation.
Mhm.
We get the conversation. The conversation is what's valuable.
So you mentioned tree sizes having some proportionate impact on sap production. Is there a minimum tree size that one should consider?
Yeah, it's so typically people will say tap 12-inch diameter or bigger. Um, we with the red maples, it's such a hardy tree. We will tap down to a 10-inch. Beyond that, there's a little bit of um, a decrease in value to putting the tree on your tubing system because if it's not adding to it, it's then in some way detracting from it. So I would say for us, we do 10-inch or above. When we first started out, sometimes if the tree was in the way, we tapped it. But now we're a little bit more aware of that. And we do 10-inch and above. And the bigger, the better. I mean, the bigger the tree, the more production you will get.
Is there a formula that exists for diameter versus output?
There probably is. I don't have it. We also
I
because
figured I'd throw you a softball math
I don't
question.
know. No, it's well, and as a mathematician, it would be great if I just, oh, sorry about that, guys. My camera. Okay, there we go. I love formulas, so it would be great if I just had one in my back pocket. However, because we tap groves, we do tubing systems, we're not really looking at tree to tree production where we are. I would say that, the information I have based on that is more anecdotal from when I was tapping um, when I was tapping with just a bucket and a tap. I knew which trees were producing more, and they were the wider diameter. Um, we always had really good luck when if we had a split trunk tree, and I thought, wow, these things really produce well when it's a split trunk tree. And then I realized it's just because we were putting two taps in and going to the same bucket. So I'm not really, I think we're tapping two trees at that point.
So, speaking of taps, one of the things I saw in the chat was how many taps per tree is the suggested.
Yeah, so the suggested is one tap per tree, unless it is a larger tree size. And I believe after 18 inches diameter, you can put two taps in. And there are people who have tapped some of these ancient trees, these huge trees. You can see images of them, if you just do a Google search, and they put 3, 4 taps in a tree. We do not. We do one tap per tree. And part of that is because we are looking at this from a sustainable agroforestry component. And we really want to see this as a forest maturing over time. And every time we put a hole in a tree, we do have to move the tap each year to move away from dead wood. And so if you're putting in two taps in one year, you're sort of doubling that dead wood that you
Mhm.
need to stay away from. So we're in this for the long run. We want to really create a sustainable agroforestry project and product. And so that's why we only do one tap per tree.
I'm not going to preview my presentation at our annual meeting on Saturday, but there is a bill actually that was just introduced relating to agroforestry that does mention maple syrup.
Oh,
And so it's one of the first touches on the subject matter. It's a proposed bill and it probably is a very long shot, but it's still a subject matter. So you
oh,
may want,
I'll be
yeah,
interested to learn
yeah, I'll,
more.
I'll fill everybody in on that. But it's
Yeah.
just interesting to see that approach being taken. And I'm just trying to see oh, yes, what kind of wood do you use? Do you know?
Yeah, so we use a variety. So you mean in the evaporator?
Yes.
So we use a variety. Our evaporator, we have a lot of access to wood here at Stockton, and we use whatever we can, to be honest with you. Um, but we typically will use cedar to get a very, very hot fire. And oak, but we cut it down really small, the oak, so that we want it to sort of be sustainable, but we want the fire hot. I mean,
Mhm.
that's important, but the cedar will burn too quickly. So we actually one season burned almost exclusively maple because we just happened to have that on Stockton with some of the trees that had come down. And I just thought that was a kind of a cool thing that you could market like maple syrup burned exclusively over maple wood. Um, so we do use a variety. And right now this year we used almost exclusively pine. So it really
It
is
varies from year to year.
it just
So
depends on
yeah.
what we have. Yep.
My last question for you, is there any testing that you do of the output product for color, uh, I don't know, density, anything
Well, the
that
density certainly. So the density is the sugar content, right? So when we get it to like 66, 67% sugar, that's the ideal, that's the mark. Um, in terms of like rating it, that you can actually have it rated for flavor, for color. It used to be that maple syrup was graded, like grade A, grade B, and that was primarily based on the coloration, and they no longer use that same grading scale because it was very reminiscent of grade A was the best and grade C was the worst, that kind of feel. And it's just preference. The darker the syrup, when we produce syrup, it will be different colors at different times in the season. So our first run of syrup will be lighter and it will be a less robust flavor. And as the season goes on, the coloration gets darker and the flavor profile gets darker. Now, one of the things that has been very interesting with our partnership in Vermont is what they are fascinated by is that our color syrup matches what their poorer quality taste syrup is, but our flavor matches their better quality. So they're a little fascinated by how, and I think this is because it's purely red maple that we get a darker syrup, and also we're small batch, so we're cooking it a little bit longer. Um, our our season, we have a lot of variation in weather, so we might have a little bit more bacteria build up, and that can affect, not harmful to eat, but it can affect the coloration of your syrup. So there's a lot of factors that are going into it that we don't fully understand yet, but it is an interesting component that if we want to match Vermont's color, we don't match their flavor.
Mhm. That is interesting. Last question. I'm sorry, I have one more to
That's
throw on.
okay.
Can people buy Stockton syrup?
They can. So we actually sell our maple syrup at a premium, and it's about $3 an ounce. That's crazy. I mean, that's wonderful because all of the money goes back into the project, every bit of it. So it's wonderful, but it's a price point based on the fact that we don't produce a lot, and people really are intrigued by what we're producing. And so one of the things we've started doing with this partnership in Vermont is we've created blends. And those blends are part Stockton syrup, so you can still get that underlying Stockton flavor, but also then a blend with their sugar maple. And so now we have two products for sale. We have our product for sale. In fact, I have one here. So here's a bottle, an 8-ounce bottle that we sell. This is ours that we sell for $25. Um, and then we have a blend that's called our gold label. And that's a blend of Stockton syrup and Vermont syrup, just particular to this family farm that we work with. And that sells for $15. So it
You can do
allows.
that online.
So right now we're selling in the bookstore here at Stockton. We're working on getting an online, but will happen online. It will be only for the blends because we would sell out of ours. People just love it. And I mean, to be honest with you, they love the syrup, they love the flavor profile, but they also love the story. And I think all of us understand that when you're producing something, whether it's at a small family farm or agroforestry, that the story is just as important as the product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has truly been a great evening. I really, really enjoyed it. I think it's probably the one I enjoyed the most so
Oh,
far, and I've done a whole bunch of these. And I really appreciate that it's so hands-on coming from you. And so we're hearing it, straight from the person doing it and has, created the entire project from start to where we are today. And I thank you so much for being here. And watching the chat was quite interesting because the participation of people in responding to the questions meant I didn't have to ask you those questions. But
oh
the,
yes, I can see.
it's
Okay.
really great. I
I'm
mean, it's like a
so
treat.
bad
It's
at
like a
chat.
treatise on how to do maple sugaring, and there's all kinds of information in here. And I did see someone I think is participating from North Carolina, so I think they're getting the distance award tonight.
There you go.
And
And that's the other really interesting thing is that places you wouldn't expect, if you have the right elevation, you can produce maple syrup.
yep, that's what's really cool. And by the
Yep.
way, Charlize is our former board member of
Yes.
NJFA. So hi, Charlize. And thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, just thank you for having me. This was a lovely evening spent in your company, to be surrounded by like-minded people. Go out in the woods.
Very good. Everybody enjoy yourselves and have a great, great weekend coming up. Thank you.